Star Trek is one of the most well-known science fiction franchises of all time, having lasted well over 5 decades and continuing to make live-action shows to this day. As a franchise, it's also produced various literature, video games, toys, and of course, comics. Which brings us to today's subject. We'll be starting a series that's published by IDW Publishing, who at the time of this video's release has the Star Trek comic license, called Star Trek Year 5, specifically issues 1 and 2. Now, why start with this series rather than the series where the TNG crew met their mirror universe counterparts, or the one where the godlike being Q has the cast of the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager meet and fight each other? It's the idea of exploring the final year of Kirk's original 5-year mission that intrigues me. The original series only lasted 3 years, despite the opening narration saying that Kirk's mission to explore strange new worlds was supposed to last 5. Does this mean the show was originally planned to last 5 years? I honestly don't know. The point is, supposedly the audience saw 3, possibly 4 years of that 5-year mission, and if one accepts the animated series as canon, then definitely 4 years. There was a mini-series released in 2009 called Star Trek Mission's End that depicted the actual final mission of Kirk's original 5-year outing. Whether Year 5 will treat those events as canon, we'll have to see. Though I should point out that as of this video, I have not read Mission's End. That may change later on. Before we get started, a few things. First, this series was clearly meant for fans of Star Trek. Second, I'm going to assume the majority of you who are watching this are fans of Star Trek in some capacity. If not, there are various resources online that can help you fill in the gaps. However, I will help you here and there. For example, I will go ahead and introduce the characters since they're right here on issue 1's cover. First, we have Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, and right next to him is the half-human, half-Vulcan Mr. Spock, who has the double duty of being first officer and science officer. And below them, we have the rest of our cast. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy, Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott, aka Scotty, Hikaru Sulu, the ship's pilot, Pavel Chekhov, the navigator, and Lieutenant Uhura, the communications officer. What some may consider the 8th main character of the series is also on the cover. The USS Enterprise herself, NCC-1701. Of course, that'll make the events of movie 3 all the more tragic. And finally, and this is for fellow Star Trek fans, I want you to clear your mind of everything after the events of the original series. The movies, the Next Generation era, it never happened. You'll see why as we dive right in. The story begins with the Enterprise heading towards an uncertain doom. Well, that's one way to end a 5-year mission. On the bridge, Captain Kirk's recording his final log entry, while someone in the shadows has a phaser pointed at his head. And Kirk's in rough shape, even got the old torn shirt here. Maybe Starfleet will finally change their uniforms since the current ones wear and tear under stress. We then flash back to the actual beginning of Year 5. The crew's job here is to guide a device called the Einstein-Rosen Ouroboros to a specific spot to prevent the Lloyd Zeta hypergiant from exploding. According to Spock, if the hypergiant were to go boom, the resulting gamma burst would cause mass extinctions on any planet with life within 10,000 light years. So yeah, they better not screw this up. As the Enterprise sticks around to make sure the device functions properly, we get a couple of scenes between our characters. First, we have McCoy visiting Kirk, who's changed into his green shirt that he occasionally wears on the show, in his quarters. He's looking down, but luckily Bones just happened to bring the right medicine. Saurian brandy. McCoy notes the data pad Kirk has, and Kirk reveals its contents. He's being promoted to Admiral. Hey, an even better excuse to drink up, according to McCoy. Now here's the reason Kirk's a bit bummed. He doesn't want to go home. To best explain why, he tells the story of how his father repeatedly told him and his brother Sam various tales without opening any books. You know, oral tradition, just like the ancients did it. Kirk recognized that the key to remembering the stories, or at least try to remember the stories, is the use of repeated phrases that describe characters, and thus those characters are remembered for millennia. And that's what Kirk is afraid of. Who will he be if he's no longer Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise? The next scene involves Spock and Scotty in a turbolift. After Spock comments on Scotty's weight gain, Scotty mentions the computers are on the fritz thanks to the hypergiant's energies, and that someone from Spock's department should have addressed this sooner. The reason Scotty went straight to Spock instead of, telling the person who's responsible for the job is he sees potential captain material in Spock. That's enough for Spock to make sure the crewman gets to work fixing the computer. On the bridge, Uhura picks up a signal from Lloyd Zeta 9, which she's able to identify as Tholian. Kirk is then called to the bridge, and he orders Sulu to pilot a course to the planet. Once they arrive, the landing party, consisting of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and 3 security officers, beam down. Because the Tholians are crystal-based life forms, McCoy's not sure if he can detect them with his current equipment. That's why they also brought along a harmonic resonator to detect any Tholians via vibration. And they found them, all dead and shattered. McCoy scans ahead, which reads absolute 0. This means the attacker is familiar with Tholian biology enough to do this. Kirk has an idea of who may be behind this, and brings up the Iliad to help illustrate that point. How the combatants on both sides were all Greek, meaning the attackers here could have also been Tholian. Speaking of, a Tholian appears and attacks the landing party. Phasers do jack all, being a creature made of crystal. However, Kirk has a plan. He just needs a bit of time. Spock, logical being and all, provides the distraction by punching the Tholian in the chest. Yeah. It does crack the creature, but it also breaks Spock's hand. Well, thankfully, Kirk has completed his task. He jury-rigs a phaser rifle and the harmonic resonator together to blast a hole in the Tholian, instantly killing it. They soon get a call from the Enterprise. Seems they are not the only ones to get the distress call. As the landing party prepares to beam up, they find something underneath some rubble. A Tholian child. Kirk, compassionate man that he is, orders it beamed up along with the party. Ending issue 1. Issue 2 begins with the Tholian captain listing all the crimes the Enterprise crew committed against the Assembly, including violating their territory, murdering a Tholian, and quote-unquote kidnapping a Tholian child. They'll let them go if they return the Tholian child and wipe all records of these events. Spock suggests complying with their demands, given that this is a potential diplomatic incident. But Kirk wants to investigate the matter further, believing a Tholian splinter group is responsible for the attack. The Tholians don't accept that answer and attack the Enterprise, killing several crewmen and screwing up the computer. So much so that Sulu has to manually get the ship up to Warp 1 to escape for the moment. With the Tholian ship in pursuit, but not within weapons range, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy meet in the conference room to discuss options. Spock and McCoy are on the same wavelength about the situation. Return the Tholian child, and hopefully this will placate the Tholians. The Enterprise doesn't need to get involved with their affairs. However, Kirk now believes, based on the way the Enterprise was attacked, it was the Tholian Assembly themselves and not a splinter group that attacked the colony. And the child will remain on board until he gets to the bottom of this. Spock and Bones are figuring out why Kirk is acting like this, with Spock pointing out that Starfleet has no information on how the Tholian Assembly operates. And the child on board? What if instead of sanctuary, it wants to kill them all? You know, Kirk, Spock does have a point. While the three continue to debate the issue, the bridge crew discuss their own options. And without the computer, those options will likely end in their deaths. Uhura suggests, hey, instead of relying on a computer, why not rely on the finest minds in Starfleet in this very room? Sure enough, they begin discussing the energy weapon the Tholians used, which, when you get down to it, is a weaponized version of the Tholian web they've previously encountered. They theorize that this stasis beam can slow the energy that bonds molecules to virtually nothing. No bonds to the cells, meaning any living thing would disintegrate or shatter like the Tholian bodies on the colony. Yeah, looks like Kirk was right on the identity of the attacker. As they start preparing countermeasures, Kirk takes some time to chat with the Tholian child. In an attempt to bond with it, Kirk shares a story about how he was betrayed by one who was supposed to protect him. Specifically, the time he was on Tarsus 4 during a food shortage, and that the Governor Kodos executed thousands of people so that the survivors can have the remaining supplies. Kirk hopes the child will understand him enough to give him consent for sanctuary. Based on this gesture, I think that's a yes. It's kind of fitting Kirk would use the same storytelling method his father did to form a connection to a child. Kirk returns to the bridge where the crew shares what they figured out about the weapon and how to fight back. Kirk, while proud of his crew for their exceptional work, doesn't want the situation to turn into a full-on war. Spock has an alternate solution, one that requires an exceptional pilot to succeed. They return to the Lloyd Zeta hypergiant right where they need to be. The Tholian vessel likewise drops out of warp and fires its stasis beam. The ERO present bends the beam away from the Enterprise. With the advantage currently theirs, Kirk contacts the Tholian ship to deliver a warning. The gravity waves between the ships will shatter the Tholian one like glass, and by the time they make adjustments, the Enterprise will be long gone. Also, the child has been granted asylum, and whatever the Tholian ship does next will be on them. The Enterprise leaves, and in their haste, the Tholian ship does not adjust their angle and shatters. As the Enterprise begins its journey home, a log entry from Kirk some point in the future has him looking back on these events, hoping he made the right call on bringing the Tholian child on board, and that history will not end with a war. We're off to a good start, with the beginning showing the battle-damaged Kirk and the Shadow figure. It's a case of how we got here and life flashing before your eyes. I hope this subplot gets a satisfying payoff down the line. As for the actual story itself, it definitely has the feel of the original series, while also setting up things for the future, namely the conflict with the Tholians and the presence of the Tholian child on the ship. Writers Jackson Langsing and Colin Kelly appear to be fans of the show, or at the very least, they did their homework. The main trio's characteristics are spot on, especially with their discussion about the Tholian situation. Spock providing the rational input, McCoy giving his passionate perspective, and Kirk trying to balance these two extremes. The story also gives the secondary main cast moments to shine, with Uhura coming up with the idea of using Starfleet's finest minds instead of a computer, Chekhov providing key information to understand the Tholian weapon, Scotty's leadership, and Sulu's piloting skills. The writers also provide bits of continuity here and there for the fans. There's the Tholian Web episode, obviously, but there are also nods to past adventures like the Shore Leaf Planet and the time they tackled Jack the Ripper. Kirk's story about Tarsus 4 and Governor Kodos comes from the episode Consciousness of the King. However, there's a deeper continuity nod in that story. He got to Tarsus 4 on a Warp 2 ship captained by an old man named Mayweather, who's lived in space all his life. If you're familiar with the prequel series Enterprise, then this is likely to be Travis Mayweather, the pilot of Earth's first Warp 5 ship, the NX-01. There are some call forwards, and I cannot help but reapply the events of the films and future series in order to talk about it. The smaller one about Spock commenting on Scotty's weight gain. If you've seen the films, yeah. In my opinion, that's a bit mean-spirited. A more serious call forward is Kirk being promoted to Admiral and him not being happy about it. He's afraid that he'll be a nobody once he's no longer a captain. This ties in nicely to what will eventually happen to him in the films. To paraphrase Spock, commanding a starship is Kirk's first best destiny. Thankfully for him, the crews of the late 23rd and 24th century will remember Kirk as a legend, and thanks to time shenanigans, some will actually get to meet him. The artwork is gorgeous, from capturing the characters' likenesses to the beautiful shots of the ships, and gives the Tholians a sense of otherworldliness. That's the beauty with comics. They're not limited by television budgets. Of course, having talented artists is the major factor in all this. At this moment, I definitely recommend this series, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. If and when I return to Year 5, we'll be taking a look at the events of a past episode coming back to haunt our crew, especially Dr. McCoy. You know, Spock, just because you have greater strength than your human crewmates doesn't mean you're Superman.